All right. So I believe we are all set up now, streaming live on Facebook. Welcome everyone to this episode of River Reflections with Colorado River Alliance. My name is Katie Bedrich. I'm a program manager at CRA, and I'm joined here today with some great panelists who I'm going to introduce in just a second. And just want to say thank you to everyone who is tuning in for this conversation today. Just to kick off and explain a little bit about today's panel and what we hope to become a series in our virtual speaker series, specifically on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Over the past several weeks at Colorado River Alliance, our staff and our board have been reflecting on our own efforts to promote diversity and inclusion within our organization, within our programs. And we found that we have a lot of work to do. And while most of this work is going to be internal, externally, what we want to do right now and what our goal is with this series is to give the space and amplify the voices of people of color in the industry and the amazing individuals and organizations who are already exemplifying diversity in their programs and their organizations. So without further ado, here are some of those wonderful people today representing their organizations, and we are going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in environmental youth programs. So we have Melinda Chow, Executive Director for Austin Youth River Watch. We have Chanel Davis, Program Coordinator at Austin Youth River Watch. We have Masi Mejia, who is an educator for the East Foundation. And we also have Kimberly Sorensen, State Park Diversity Engagement Coordinator at Texas Parks and Wildlife. So again, a big thank you to all of you for joining us today on the panel and being a part of today's discussion. Also wanted to let everyone know that the first 45 minutes of this panel is going to be moderated questions, and at the last 15 minutes, we will be taking questions from our audience. So at any time throughout the conversation, feel free to drop a comment on Facebook right here, and we will hopefully get to everyone's questions during that time towards the end. So let's hear from our panelists. We're gonna talk a little bit about each panelist's background in environmental education, as well as their current roles right now at their organization. So let's start with Melinda Chow from Austin Youth River Watch.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much to CRA for putting this together and for inviting us to be a part of this. So the relevant background for me in environmental education and what I do with Austin Youth River Watch is more broadly in youth development and informal science and environmental education and social justice, along with community engagement and nonprofits in general. I'm the ED at Austin Youth River Watch, as you mentioned, and in plain language, that pretty much just means that I make sure everything happens. In terms of our environmental education program, I provide overall direction to the program team, but it's my program team who are making the day-to-day decisions and doing the hard work of delivering our program directly to the youth that we work with. I get to work with awesome program team members like Chanel, who's with us here today on the panel, along with Amelia, Beth, and Emma, who are watching this with us today.
All right, thank you, Melinda. Should we go to Chanel? Speaking of your awesome programs team.
Sure, yeah. Also very happy to be here. For me, my formal schooling was in animal behavior, ecology and conservation, environmental studies, and education. And I'm currently program coordinator at Austin Youth River Watch, where my main role is delivering the daily programming to our high school students, which is the population that we work with. And we do lots of things, mainly water quality testing, trash cleanups, native grass and tree plantings, as well as nature ID hikes and all sorts of other environmental as well as youth development activities.
Awesome. Thank you, Chanel. What about you, Masi? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do now with East Foundation?
Definitely. So I have degrees in wildlife science. And now as an educator for the East Foundation, what I do is I go into the classroom and deliver hands-on presentations with the hopes that we can bring students out to one of our ranches. So our mission is to promote the advancement of land stewardship through ranching, science, and education. And we cover lots of counties down here in South Texas.
Thanks, Masi. And next, let's go to Kimberly with TPWD.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm excited to be here as well and talking about this topic. I started out as an outdoor educator in 2008 with a small company in Austin called Expedition School, and spent many years putting people on the water around Austin and getting them outside. And that led into my career with Parks and Wildlife, where I became the outdoor education diversity specialist for the Texas Outdoor Family Program. We started what we call community partnerships with different community groups around the Houston area, and have now expanded that program across the state to basically create partnerships to reach underrepresented audiences and get them connected to our outdoor resources. What I didn't know is that my career in outdoor education was going to lead to a new career in diversity and inclusion. And so I've always had a passion for getting people connected to outside and seeing the joy of their face when they catch a fish or get to paddle for the first time. And now I get to do that on a much larger scale across the state and help people connect to all of our state parks across Texas.
Yeah, that's great. So would you say that that was one of the biggest influences for you, Kimberly, kind of early on in your career, realizing that joy and engagement that outdoor education brings?
Yeah, I was really fortunate growing up that my dad was a big fisherman and my parents, we actually camped a lot because it was an inexpensive way to vacation. That's sort of how my camping life started, was that's what we could afford to do. So we spent time out in the woods and at the lake and fishing and camping. But you know, as I've worked through my career in outdoor education, I realized that not everybody has that opportunity. Not everybody has a mentor to get them outside. And so through working with community leaders and organizations, we're able to provide that access to youth across the entire state, and it expands larger than that across the nation. You know, obviously partnerships between state entities and nonprofits really make those things happen. And so, yeah, I've been inspired by trying to help people just really realize their potential in the outdoors, learn the skills that they need to recreate responsibility, and help them really find their why or their connection to spending time in nature.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Kimberly. As far as everyone else goes, thinking about what influences impacted your decision, especially early on, what really made you want to go into this field? I'm going to go to Chanel. Chanel and I actually have something in common, and Melinda as well, in that we were all members of AmeriCorps at one time or another, which definitely played a part for me. But let's hear from Chanel. What other influences impacted this decision?
Yeah, absolutely. Katie and I did the same AmeriCorps program. I finished it a year ago and her a little bit before me here in Austin. But for me, my love and obsession with animals was my window into kind of beginning to understand the natural world. When I was young with my family, I had countless positive experiences in nature on road trips, nature walks, at the park, all sorts of things. And it wasn't until I got older that I realized that now that I'm doing these things in my adult life, I wasn't seeing quite as many people of color out there doing the same thing as me. And it led me to ask, you know, a lot of questions about why that is. And so after asking those questions, my answer led me to my career choice, which is to help guide and facilitate youth of color, in particular, to have positive experiences in nature so that they then also have the opportunity to appreciate, love, be in, and be comfortable and excited about nature in the same ways that so many of us are.
I love that. Thank you, Chanel. Let's go to Masi. Masi, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Masi's joining us from all the way down in South Texas. So tell us a little bit about that, Masi.
Definitely. I think similar to Chanel, being outside, I was very fortunate that my parents let me have whatever animal I think I wanted except for a snake. And then I really was interested in the science, so that's why I went the wildlife science route. And I got a bachelor's, master's, and started a PhD in wildlife science. And then in 2016, my mother unexpectedly passed away. So I actually left South Texas. I was like, I'm leaving Laredo and never coming back. And I actually found myself back in South Texas. My mom was a formal educator, and she always told me, you know, Mejia, you can be whatever you want, just don't be a teacher. So now I'm a natural resource educator. And I think I'm very blessed that I get to blend her love of teaching, my love of teaching, and my love of the natural world and share that with other students here in South Texas. And I think similar to Chanel as well, you know, when I was doing my bachelor's, my master's, and PhD, there weren't that many people that looked like me. And so having to fit into that realm. So I think that's one thing that I'm very blessed to get to do here in South Texas is to promote entering careers in the field of natural resources.
Great, thank you, Masi. And let's go to Melinda. Can you tell us what were some influences for you in your decision to go into the field?
Yeah, so I chose to work with Riverwatch because the program had everything I was interested in: the environment, youth development, and working with diverse and underserved youth. And also, I really like to imagine how a young Melinda, a misfit in high school who was interested in nature and the outdoors, but I didn't really have great outlets to nurture those interests, how much I would have benefited from a program like Riverwatch. I also resonate with a lot of what Chanel and Masi said. I didn't see people like me represented in outdoor environments or in things that I saw in the media, having those types of adventures. And as a non-Black person of color, I have both been a victim and a benefactor of privilege. And I feel that I have a responsibility to uplift those around me. And so, yeah, there's a lot about Riverwatch that speaks to my heart. And that's why I chose to enter this field.
Thank you, Melinda. And thank you for all your answers and opening up and letting us know where you're coming from. Sincerely, I really appreciate it. So let's get into more of our topic today, which is increasing diversity and equity and inclusion for youth of color in our education programs. And I'd like to talk first about Austin Youth Riverwatch because I would love for you guys to share more about your program and what DEI actually looks like in your day-to-day, and your entire mission is really revolved around that goal. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Melinda.
Sure. Yeah, so I can share a little bit about our program demographics. And so it's over 85% youth of color in our program that we serve. And so in most years, including our regular program and then a lot of the sort of ancillary programming we do, that's roughly 200 kids. And over 65% of them, really it's more like 75%, are going to be economically challenged. So meaning being on free and reduced lunch. And so our day-to-day programming that we provide, the audience to which we provide it to, diversity, equity, inclusion is really important in how we deliver that. And there is intention in how we've designed the program to make it accessible. So we provide full transportation in non-pandemic times. We also provide meals in our program, and we provide stipends to eliminate the barrier of being able to be a part of a program like ours. Also, in terms of our outcomes, we have a 100% high school graduation rate, which we're really proud of. And we also, about 67% of our high schoolers after our program is over end up choosing to go into science and environmental fields. And more than 90% of them go off to college. So I just shared a lot of stats there. Long term, there's still room for improvement. We can reach even more youth of color. We can innovate in our program and find more ways to engage kids with different subjects and achieve greater levels of success for underserved youth.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's great information. And again, I really admire your program and what y'all do, especially hearing those positive outcomes of what that looks like. That clearly making diversity, equity, and inclusion a core part of your programs leads to those positive outcomes. And we can talk a little bit more about that. Chanel, I know, you are more in the day-to-day working with youth and Austin Youth River Watch. So can you tell me a little bit about your interactions and kind of the mentorship aspect that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of our day-to-day, one of our big things that we go over with our students, whether they're new or returning every single year, is the student contract, where we talk a lot about our community standards and how important it is for each of us to uphold and honor those. And in there, we do talk about, making sure that we're using inclusive language and behavior. And I think that starting from that point, so that the youth know that we know in order for all of us to feel welcome and learn and contribute to this environment, this community that we're creating, we all play a part in that. And I also think that whenever we are engaging with our students, either at the Eco House, which is what we call our office and where all the students come back to at the end of the day, or out in the field, we're always intentionally looking for diverse guests to speak to our students, whether that be about career or college readiness, and various other career fields, whether it's photography, wildlife science, and all sorts of things like that. And then I also think that we try to balance working within the communities that our students live in, all throughout Austin and Manor, as well as traveling to different places in Austin and in Texas that many of our students, especially students of color, have never been to before. Like taking students to Barton Springs to snorkel, or to Texas state parks for campouts, or to West Texas on a big spring break camping trip, or even just ranches in Manor, if some of our students have only ever seen the city of Austin. So I think that there's a lot of things like that that really encompass diversity, equity, inclusion with all of our students.
Definitely. And yeah, I love that mentorship. I love what a big role y'all play in the lives of the youth that you serve. So love hearing about that. And then I'm going to go to Masi, because I know representation plays a big role in what you do as well, in terms of diversity and equity for your students. So can you tell us a little bit about how racial representation and diversity impacts your programs?
Definitely. So when I go into the classroom and I tell students, yeah, I have a master's in science, and I got to do all this cool research and, catching turtles and snakes and stuff. I think students are just blown away that someone that looks like them, that is from Laredo, got to go, to Africa, British Virgin Islands, and have all these amazing trips, and then come back and be able to share those stories, and then support those students. Like, yeah, you can become a veterinarian. You can, maybe you don't want to go the veterinarian route. You can become a wildlife biologist. You can study scat. You can go work on a ranch and be a cowboy or cowgirl. So that definitely matters here in South Texas, especially because it is predominantly Hispanic. There are lots of routes of, if you're going to work outside, you're going to be working in a field, kind of going back to cotton picking and stuff like that, just because of where we are in South Texas. But now they realize there are still careers that allow them to be outside, and you can get paid to do it.
Definitely. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you're taking your youth out in nature?
Definitely. So once I do a visit in the classroom, they come out to one of our 2 ranches. So the East Foundation has over 215,000 acres of ranch land, and students from the Laredo and surrounding areas will visit the San Antonio Viejo Ranch, which is south of Heavenville, and that ranch is 150,000 acres. Or Port Mansfield, or near Port Mansfield area, we have our El Saus, which is 26,000 acres. So they're visiting ranches that are close to them within an hour or an hour and a half drive. So it's close to home. They realize, it doesn't look that much different, but we're taking them out and they're seeing mesquite trees that, they've never seen, but they're there, or green jays and stuff like that. So getting them out, just outside and looking at the South Texas brushland.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I like what you said about some places not looking so different at first, but, really after engaging youth in their surroundings and after they have that knowledge, then they can start looking at where they're at right now in a different lens.
Definitely, and appreciating it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Let's go to Kimberly. And Kimberly, can you tell us what diversity and equity is looking like in our state parks?
I can. We've made some great strides over the last few years in our efforts for diversity, equity, and inclusion across state parks. One, this is a new position that I'm in, so we've hired diversity engagement coordinator. Two, within Texas Parks and Wildlife, we've hired an ADA coordinator that's helping us with our ADA compliance across the state. We also have a diversity and inclusion director for the agency. And so within state parks, we've actually set a new strategic plan and diversity and inclusion goals, and they include steps around recruitment, retention, and outreach and education. We know within recruitment that we need to recruit from diverse audiences across the entire state, with a goal of having our employees be a part of the communities that they work in and be able to represent. When we talk about representation, we want to make sure that we have a diverse workforce that reflects the constituents of Texas. From a retention standpoint and also recruitment standpoint, we also want to make sure that we are a welcoming environment. Once someone comes and visits us or someone comes to work with us, it's a safe and welcome environment. And that includes, for people of color, it includes LGBTQ community, it includes anyone who's felt marginalized within their life, that parks are a place of solace and connection and a place to heal, and not a place to fear. And so we've been working really hard on that. And we do that through our outreach and education. A lot of our park interpreters are working on telling the full story of our parks, everything from CCC and segregation to not being allowed into a park. Those stories are coming out, and we're doing a much better job of sharing the story and owning up to the past so that we can move forward in the future and ensure that everybody knows that state parks are for them. They are theirs. Everybody that lives in Texas, it is your public land. So we encourage you to come out and spend time in our parks.
I love that. Thank you. I think that is something that a lot of people are learning more about right now, especially in the white community, about how the outdoors is not an escape for everyone, and that it really takes, like you said, making it relevant, telling the stories, and having the right people tell those stories, to have people feel welcome and want to be in those spaces. So I love that. So we have talked a lot about our programs kind of in the pre-COVID era, about how we've been interacting with youth, and COVID-19, the pandemic, has obviously disrupted a lot of our programming in one way or another. So I want to ask how COVID-19 has changed the way that you think about diversity and equity and inclusion. Obviously, we're having to deliver programs differently. We're having to think about access now, with a lot of virtual programming and things like that. So does anyone have something that has changed in their program, or something that they've just been thinking about changing in terms of this new era that we're kind of moving into now.
I can go. So pre-COVID, we would bring students out to the ranch, and I think March 9th, that started getting calls of teachers canceling coming out to the ranch. And so I think up until that point, I had 700 students that were scheduled to come out to our San Antonio Viejo ranch. And so of course they didn't get to come out. And so one step that we're going to start working with after this initial shock of what's going on, how are we going to connect, we are going to be making the move to virtual field lessons, virtual programming for students, so that they can get a tour of the ranch and get to see, a day in the life of a cowboy, a day in the life of a wildlife researcher, while they are either, working remotely or in the classroom.
Thanks, Masi. And I think that just sort of all of our silence there is kind of indicative of this being a challenge. I know it's a challenge for me and our programs at Colorado River Alliance, making the transition to virtual programming, but then realizing not all of the students that we're trying to reach have internet access. That's something that school districts have also been working out. But we're losing that really hands-on interaction that is really important for a lot of kids, to be able to actually be outside and touching things and interacting in that way. So does anyone else have any thoughts on that, about maybe how we can move forward?
I can jump in if I saw Melinda has something. Go for it, Melinda.
Well, I think in terms of how to move forward, I think we're all still figuring that out. I didn't expect that part of the question. Sorry, Kate. I was just going to say, similar to what Masi mentioned, right before the lockdown. So it was right around the school spring break here in Austin. And every year during spring break, we plan an extended camping trip with several of our students. And this is, a life-changing experience for many of our youth. We were going to go to West Texas and go to the Davis Mountains. It was going to be a 5-night, 6-day epic camping trip. And we had to cancel it. It was heartbreaking to have to do that, because for a lot of our kids, this would be the first time they would ever get to experience something like that. So that's something we definitely had to do. In terms of our programming, we switched to virtual, like many folks in education, pretty quickly. Again, I have an awesome staff, and we were able to put together a distance learning program that had some outdoor aspects to it, but with a lot of safety and distancing measures in mind. It definitely isn't as engaging as doing it in person in normal times. We're taking kids to parks and creeks to learn hands-on and to splash around and stuff. So it's not quite the same. It hasn't changed the way we think about diversity, equity, inclusion. If anything, it's emphasized how much more it's important now than it was before. And we had to think about access in a different way. And one of the things that that we experimented with is having a giant group Zoom call where we are all on our mobile devices, because that's probably the way our kids access it, right? And we're like, wow, this is really awkward. It's not quite the same as being on a laptop, which not all of our kids have. And so we need to rethink how we did that in our program. The other thing we understood was that the support we provide in our program makes such a big difference in our kids' lives. Once we went into lockdown, we weren't delivering programs in person anymore, and we realized we weren't feeding our kids. That meant, and so we figured out another way to do that. We have been for quite a while now delivering meals directly to our students to provide support for those food security issues.
I love that. Thank you. And yeah, I think what you're saying is important also, that maybe we haven't quite figured out, and I'm kind of speaking for myself too, maybe we haven't figured out how to make virtual programming as equitable as our in-person programs or those things. But just the importance of being there and showing your students and keeping that outreach there, that, you know, we are still here, we're still supporting you, and we still care about your environmental education. So I think that aspect of it is great. Kimberly, did you have anything to add?
I do. We've had the opportunity to host some community meetings and talk to partners across the state. And much like the story that you're telling, you know, we've had to switch to virtual. We've been using new techniques. One of the positive benefits from state parks is a lot of our rangers have gotten a lot better at creating video programs and virtual programs. And what's great about that is they stay around. Our Facebook pages, if you go to specific parks or programs, you'll see those videos and they stay there. So there's something that can be shared with groups ongoing. An example of that, our Buffalo Soldiers Heritage Program has been running ongoing history and culture programs that can be tied into TEKS and tied into other things for school teachers. And you know, our Text Outdoor Family Program ran a lot of virtual programs on how to do different outdoor skills and cooking and things like that. So we've gotten a lot better on that. And we've also included, we have a new distance learning coordinator that's helping us work on some ongoing Zoom programs that will go into an education page. So this time has actually given us the moment to slow down and find programs that we'll be able to share for a long time versus the one-off, you know, a program that's live and only whoever was there got to see it. So there is a positive light in that. I will tell you that our rangers really, really miss their audiences, and they really, really want to teach to an audience. We can do that with audiences virtually. So if there are groups out there that you know are trying to find educators, please reach out to us, because our rangers would love nothing more than to have a group to talk to. So that's a big change. And from equity, same thing, trying to make sure that people have access to that. We've sort of focused on Facebook, but then we get into challenges of captioning, closed captioning, making sure that it's accessible to all participants. So those are things that we've also been working on.
That's great. Yeah, all you know, good ideas, good silver linings, like you said as well, Kimberly, that yes, there is a positive aspect to this as well. You know, one thing for Colorado River Alliance, where we are, our mission has always been to try and serve, you know, our whole river basin across Texas, but our in-person programs are based here in Austin. So, you know, now the hope is that we can connect with people far and wide doing virtual programmings and connecting with educators like Masi down in South Texas and, you know, collaborating, spanning distance through our virtual programs. But that being said, I hope we can get back to our in-person programs in the near future. So thinking about that, and let's jump forward a little bit. Let's say that we can get back to our in-person programs and, you know, what we've been doing and some of those initiatives to increase diversity and equity. A lot of times thinking about these things for nonprofits, you know, we look for measurable outcomes. We look for data and people are looking for data-driven outcomes for all of their inputs. So what are some things that we can look at as far as measurable outcomes when we're thinking about how diverse and equitable our programs actually are? How can we make sure that we're actually seeing more youth of color, that we're actually increasing their knowledge gains and not just, you know, saying that we are? Melinda?
Sure. We because I shared all those percentages, excuse me, earlier. We actively track the demographics of the kids in our program, and so that's one way to ensure that you are reaching a diverse set of kids is to do that. Also, in our program, we have pre and post tests and pre and post surveys. And so that's measuring the content and the knowledge that kids gain in our program about water quality, watershed, environmental education aspects. But it also includes questions like, do you feel supported in our program? Do you have more confidence now in being in the environment, in being in nature and being in outdoors, in subjects of science? And so, you know, it's both quantitative and qualitatively measured, and it's not just about things they learn, but there's also a lot of social and emotional learning aspects and issues of empowerment that are looking to be measured in our pre and post tests and surveys. So we also, as much as possible, try to track some long-term pieces like what happens after Riverwatch. As a small nonprofit, that can be a little bit difficult, but as much as possible, that is a measurable outcome that can be examined about the success of your DEI program initiatives.
Definitely, definitely. Anybody else have anything to add on that front?
Katie, I know that's one of the areas that we're constantly working on and trying to figure out better ways to track. From, you know, when you make a reservation with state parks, we track the zip code, which doesn't tell a complete story. You know, we don't ask every visitor their demographic background that comes in. When we do programs like Text Out Our Family, we did track the demographics. So I have charts from 2013 through 2019 that show the incredible increase in diversity when we started working with partner groups, because the partner groups served a variety of communities that we weren't reaching without going through and working with those leaders. So that's definitely a tracking area where I saw a huge difference in a 5 to 6 year time span when we just changed our model of how we were interacting with the people in our community.
Definitely, that's a good point where, you know, if you're trying these initiatives and maybe you're not seeing success, to reach out, like you said, to community partners, reach out for help and collaboration, and in that way increase DEI. It's a good point as well.
Yeah, the other thing I've seen that's been really interesting with nonprofits is groups that have programs, you know, such as Riverwatch, if they have stair steps where they go through first level and then they move on to second level, move on to another level, or they go from one program to another program. You know, the nonprofits have been out there for a long time. We're starting to see participants that went through those programs now become the leaders. And that tells a really, really high level of success for us across the state, that the youth that participated in these programs earlier are now the leaders of these programs. So that's another measure I think we need to pay attention to, because it really does tell the story of how ongoing programs create diversity and inclusion within the state.
Definitely, that's a great point, and that's definitely a goal that we should have when we're thinking about DEI and our youth of color, is bringing them to that next level so they can become leaders, implementing DEI, and that becomes the cycle. All right, let's see. So, you know, we're talking about nonprofits, we're talking about DEI, and it is a conversation that's increasing all across the country, from the largest corporations to the smallest nonprofits. But how can we, you know, move past DEI statements and make sure that we're not just checking boxes, if that makes sense? I think that as more organizations try to address diversity and equity goals, that there's going to be more need for training and education and things like that. But what else do y'all think about creating lasting change? We've heard great examples from Austin Youth Riverwatch, from East Foundation and Texas Parks and Wildlife. But is there anything else that we can do, or, you know, make sure that we are being sincere in our efforts, I guess? Is that Chanel, Masi? Okay, let's go Chanel and then Masi. Does that work?
Yeah, so I think this is a really great question. And the thing that I think of first is kind of what you mentioned very early on, Katie, that the DEI work has to start internally first. It has to start from within the organization, within the people, the staff that work there. And the organization and the people need to do the very hard work of making sure that that space that you're creating is welcoming and all inclusive to the youth or other participants that you are asking to participate in your programming. With our program, we work with youth, and it's important to remember that the burden should not fall on the youth or people of color to just show up and increase your numbers. The space that you create for them is, it needs to be created with a lot of thought and a lot of meaning behind it, and also by asking the right people for input. And so I think when I think of DEI and how organizations can change, I think those first steps definitely come from a very personal standpoint with each person and the organization as a whole, before it even comes to the point of asking and looking and searching for more diverse groups and people to kind of join in and participate in that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, that's a great point. And that is what I was trying to say. I hope I'm not rambling, is that when it comes to organizations saying, hey, we're going to increase DEI, we're going to make this a priority, that we need to do that work. We need to make sure that we're in a space where our educators are trained, that they are, that we feel comfortable with them leading these initiatives. You know, my mind goes to training on microaggressions for working with youth of color. I mean, that's huge. And we just need to make sure that the people that we're putting in positions to educate and increase DEI are representative and inclusive of the youth that we want to benefit from all of this. Masi, did you have anything else to add on that?
Definitely. So the East Foundation partnered with the Whitty Museum in San Antonio, and we created a program called Land Stewardship Ambassador for high school students. So we select 15 students in Laredo and 15 students in San Antonio. And it's a 10-week program, and every week we discuss a different topic related to the field of land stewardship and natural resources. And when we created the curriculum for the program, we specifically set out to include a week on diversity. So on one Sunday, our high schoolers from both groups of San Antonio and Laredo, we talk about diversity. So this past year, we actually were able to do a Zoom call, and we had an individual, a wildlife biologist from Alaska who was gay. We had someone from Black Outside, Latino Outdoors, and an Asian American climber. So they were able to share their responses and perspectives with our students. And so our students come from urban backgrounds. So that really opened up their mind to say, hey, you know, there are other people besides me who are interested in rock climbing, who work in Alaska. And so that's kind of what we've done to be inclusive in moving DEI forward.
I love that. Yeah, I love hearing about those programs. And we actually just had a question come in kind of as you were answering that question. We're on some telepathic level right now with our audience. But the question was, do any of your organizations have programs or lessons that focus specifically on talking about diversity in the outdoors? And Masi, that is a great example of a program exactly like that. Does anybody else have an example of that?
So for Austin River Watch, DEI is a part of everything that we do, but something that we actually have noticed and are trying to actively work on is we don't currently have any particular lessons or unit or curriculum specifically focused on that. For us, it typically comes up just in conversation and interaction with our youth. But it is something that we are going to be working on moving forward, is having some specific curriculum and some focus like within, you know, the 2 semesters that we typically work with students to talk about those things, especially in relation to the outdoors.
Awesome, awesome. Anybody else on that question?
Okay, a couple things. We've done some internal, you guys talked a little bit about training. We've been working on some internal training with our staff, just to open up dimensions of diversity, barriers to participation for diverse audiences. And most recently, our Facebook platform, our Texas Parks and Wildlife page has a huge following. And we chose recently to share the Audubon post about Black Birders Week, which brought up a lot of discussion. One, to, you know, why they would label it Black Birders Week, which if you had opportunity to watch the Zooms and look at that, you really understood why they were trying to create space and a voice for the amazing people of color who like birding. And so that actually opened a lot of conversations within Parks and Wildlife and within our Facebook page and with the community. We followed that with a post that said state parks are for everyone, which was our first reference ever to Pride Month. From the agency. And so we've had 2 big moments on social media in the last month that are really game changers and shifting into the conversation of actual inclusion within state parks, within Texas Parks and Wildlife. And so I think those might be little steps, but they really mean a big difference to the communities that are highlighted and talked about in those posts. And it's really effort of a great group of individuals within the agency that are really truly trying to open the eyes of everybody in the agency to be as inclusive as possible.
That's great to hear. Yeah. And my mind goes to, like Chanel said, that the burden or, you know, the role of learning about all of these things does not fall on people of color, certainly not our youth of color. It's really about, you know, all the resources are out there, and some of us are kind of diving into that for the first time. But in the meantime, like we've kind of been talking about, we need to make space for groups and individuals and people of color who are again exemplifying what we want to be. We don't want to say that we're doing anything until we're actually doing it. So I did realize we're about like 10 minutes out, and we have been getting some questions from the audience in. So I'm going to move on to another question that we got, which is, what can community members, so non-educators, do to support your work and affect positive change? Any ideas for our community members?
I'm going to give a 2-word: come visit. That's it. Show up, please. Come to the parks.
So the nonprofit ED will always say, support our programs. There's a donate button on our website.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also ways to volunteer because we're in a pandemic. The types of volunteering we're doing now is a little bit different. It's virtual ways to do that. But yeah, contact us and we can figure out a way to fit you in if you're interested in being a part of our program.
Yeah, donate your money and donate your time is definitely supportive.
And follow us on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And take a kid outside.
All right. Anybody else want to talk on that before I move on to the next one? All right, we have one about, oh, I skipped one. We have one question about Viejo Ranch, and Masi, is that would be to you, correct?
Yes, the San Antonio Viejo Ranch.
We just have a question about volunteering or visiting Viejo Ranch. Are those things going on right now?
So not right now. So typically when we need volunteers, it's when we have students visit the ranch. We'll have, on a normal field lesson day, we'll have 150 students visit the ranch. We also do an event called Behind the Gates, and we bring partners in, and that's where we have about 350 students a day. So that's when we can really use volunteers. And unfortunately, because it is a ranch, it is closed off to the public. just because we are a working cattle ranch where we conduct research, but that's where our state parks come in, you know, being able to visit our state parks. But definitely, if they're interested in volunteering, I can drop my name later in the comments and my email so that they can email me and we can put them on the volunteer list once we get back to normal.
Awesome. Yeah, and for anyone interested in, you know, our panelists and these organizations represented today, we can definitely connect you with more resources if anyone has more specific questions. All right, I think we have time for one more. This one is about doing the work in the upper structures of our organization. So thinking about training for board members or where our funding is sourced from. What are y'all's thoughts about implementing DEI in that way at the top?
I think it's incredibly important, Katie. I know within the agency, our executive office meets and talks about diversity and inclusion on their weekly meeting. It's a standing topic. But from a nonprofit standpoint, we need to increase the diversity of the board members. That's another area, not just education, but actually representation. So those are two areas that we all need to work together on.
Definitely. Melinda, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I was pretty much going to say what Kimberly said. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's more than just our programming. We need to think about DEI at all levels. Our leadership and our staff. It's important the volunteers and the mentors that we bring on be representative of the kids that we work with. There was a question about representation earlier for our youth. If we're truly committed to you know, helping them, what you see helps you believe and to be that. So that's where the representation matters. And if that is not a commitment and sort of very outwardly shown at all levels, you know, it's going to be harder for us to get there, to reach the areas of success. Gosh, I think I'm rambling now.
Makes sense to me. Maybe that's because I'm a rambler also. Our thought patterns are similar. But yeah, it is extremely important. And a thought that comes to my mind is similarly how we're talking about, you know, equitable access to our programs for youth of color, that we can't just wait for them to come to us. You know, we need to go find them in their communities and reach out to them. We should be doing the same for board members, you know, or for open positions in our organization. If we are truly looking to increase DEI, then we need to go out and do the work and find the people that are going to be best for those roles.
I just want to add a bit to that. We sort of talked about the importance of having the changes be internal too. I mean, we can't just go and ask people to come and diversify our programs at our organizations, right? If you've done the work internally, then your outreach will end up being more sincere. So that also has to happen.
That's a good point. Yeah, looking for measurable outcomes. Are you seeing the people that you're wanting to serve? That's a pretty good indicator if they want to be a part of your organization. So I have just one more question that I wanted to ask as we wrap up here. And that is about any resources that y'all have that you would like to share. Like I said, a lot of people are, you know, maybe just starting this work in DEI and reading and doing research and things like that. So do y'all have any recommendations for books or webinars or articles that that you find helpful or important on this topic?
I'll go first. So I really appreciate Drew Lanham's 9 Rules for the Black Bird Watcher. I think, you know, he just provides a different lens of what not many people think of when they go out birding and what we need to think about personality wise, looks wise. So I would recommend that for sure.
Anybody else? Melinda?
Yeah, so there's so much out there right now. I mean, if you do a Google, you'll get a million things, right? One thing that I recommend, especially to folks who are newer to DEI and training in those areas, is Justice in June. I think it just started off as a big Google Doc that a lot of people shared, but now it's its own website and organization. And it's not June anymore, but we should think about justice being relevant all the time, not just in June. But the way they have it set up and organized, where if you only have 10 minutes a day, here are some resources that you can read, or a podcast you can listen to, or a video to watch. I think it's very accessible, and it has a good variety of different types of media.
I like that.
Yeah, we've been using a lot of different outside resources and put them on an internal page for our employees to reach, and a couple of web pages that I've paid attention to. National Association of Interpretation has a really good connection to diversity and inclusion right now. They also have a Facebook group. And so for educators to be connected with the interpreters and educators across the whole country talking about D&I is really a positive thing. And then I would also encourage, because we're a state entity, if you have ideas, comments, suggestions, please reach out to us. If we can better serve your community, reach out to us, because our goal is to connect to the community. And I like to say it's a two-way street, though. Come talk to us too. Let's see how we can work together to make it equitable for everybody.
One that I have, I agree with Melinda. We shared, the Justice in June with everyone who works at Austin River Watch. But one that I think is also good and fun and a bit more informal are to follow environmentalists and activists on social media. And so one that I follow, her name is Green Girl Leah on Instagram, and she is a intersectional environmentalist. And so not only do her Instagram posts, produce the eco aesthetic that I try to achieve, but she also, really, she has a very strong background in intersectionality and environmentalism. And is also a part of other organizations and things like that to help educate you, even when you're just scrolling on Instagram. And I think those things are also important, just seeing people of color outdoors. If it's not in your feed, go and do the work to look for it and put it in there so that you're constantly reminded that the outdoors, that all of these spaces are for everyone and that everyone is out there.
Yeah, I love that. That is a great point, Chanel. And there are some awesome social media accounts that are doing those things. So definitely be on the lookout for those. So it is about 1 o'clock here. Does anybody else have anything to add to this conversation before we sign off?
I just want to say thank you. And I'm so inspired by the amazing women leaders on this call today. So thank you all for what you're doing to connect your communities and youth to the outdoors.
Yes, huge thank you to all of our panelists, Chanel, Masi, Kimberly, Melinda. Thank you so much for being a part of this and helping us put on this discussion. Thank you to our viewers tuning in today for being a part of this also. And like I said, we are, the conversation is not ending here. And this is just the beginning. So be on the lookout for future river reflections. One that is, give you a little sneak peek possibly in the works is women in science. So like Kimberly said, women in science are doing amazing things, as we can see right here. And so we're hoping to continue the diversity aspect of that as well. If anyone has questions or suggestions, please reach out to Colorado River Alliance on our social media, on our website. And if you have, again, specific questions for any of our panelists today, we will connect you with them as well. Y'all ready to sign off? Okay, well, thank you again so much. Enjoy the rest of your week. Stay cool out there. And we'll see y'all soon. Bye.